The drip marketing for 3.6 should be within this week. What am I hoping to see? I have made a video within the previous week covering what I think playable 5-star March, evernight could play like, what Serene could play like, and what terravox, who I assume is Dan Hung, could play like. Now, who do I think is actually going to appear in 3.6? I think that March is definitely going to be in the next version. The question is someone else going to be with her? And do I think that 3.7 could be a single character on their own, or could there potentially be another character that none of us have considered could be playable? So I'm going to assume that potentially 3.6 is going to be March / evernight and terravox / potentially Dan Hung. And the final version of Amphoreus' story, which would be 3.7, I do think Serene will be on there, whether she will be on her own, or there potentially be some other 5-star that no one knows because they're not specifically a Krytos heir that's had a silhouette released. I don't know. All I do know is, if 3.6 does house both March and Dan Hung, based on my assumptions of both of their kit, neither of them potentially have a set that works with them. The closest March has is the same gear that Castoris uses. But Castoris' Relic set focuses on slowing her speed down, which specifically synergizes with her Memo Sprite, Pollux. Meanwhile, if March wants to be played faster, that set won't work at all with her. And she doesn't spec on quantum damage. Potentially. My assumption is still that March is going to be either an Ice Remembrance character, which I think is the most likely one, or an imaginary Remembrance character. Neither of those are quantum. Meanwhile, Dan Hung potentially specs on HP, which, so far, we have no shielding set that ties to HP as a main stat. We instead have one that scales on defense, which could be completely useless for this man. Regardless of if he is Remembrance and acting as a shielder, or as an actual preservation unit, he has no sustain-related set that kind of works for him. And healing got a really good set recently. The most recent relic set we got that was for sustain-related characters was the Warrior Goddess of Sun and Thunder, which gives a speed bonus, which is usually very helpful, and has a specific mention of healing, and it provides crit damage to all allies once its effect is triggered. If you look through previous sets, the best quote-unquote shielding set we have that is specifically catered towards shielding is not very good at all. It's actually kind of terrible. It would be the Knight of Purity Palace, which increases defense by 15% and increases the max damage that can be absorbed by a shield created by the wearer by 20%. Because it scales on defense, it would be useless for terravox. That 4-piece effect would maybe have a use, but it doesn't provide you any utility to your team, which isn't great for a sustain set, unless the damage of the character is that good, or the shield is that worth investing in. They really need to up their game on a relic set for that. Meanwhile, what I assumed about evernight / March's scaling is that she would be similar to Castoris on scaling off of HP, but there's no guarantee she'll function the same way. The set that Castoris uses is Poet of Morning Collapse, which, for the 2-piece bonus, increases quantum damage by 10%. March is unlikely to be a quantum unit, and then the 4-piece decreases the wearer's speed by 8% before entering the battle. If the speed is lower than a certain threshold, it increases the crit damage by a certain threshold, and that applies to the Memo Sprite. If she needs speed at all, this set is awful for her, which I can't imagine why she would need to be played slow yet, unless for some reason her Memo Sprite functions similarly to Pollux in the fact that the longer you draw out the turns, the longer the Memo Sprite can be around and used. Based on my understanding, the main generic supportive kind of useful set for a DPS using memo sprites is Hero of Triumphant Song, which increases attack by 12%, and then for the 4-piece bonus, while the wearer's memo sprite is on the field, it increases their speed by 6%. When the wearer's memo sprite attacks, it increases the wearer and the memo sprite's crit damage by 30% for 2 turns. That can be generically good. It's really good on a glide because she of course scales with speed. Will March though? No, because based on what her boons suggest in Divergent Universe, she scales on HP. While I think that speed could be obviously a very good substat depending on how her kit works, I don't think it's going to ever be a situation where it's the main stat you'd want to get for her if she is a main DPS like I'm hoping for. So what happens then? I don't know. Like, I'm expecting them to make a new set for both March and Darnhung. But if they don't, or even if they do, we have no idea how Serene is going to work, or if existing sets will still work for her. If she functions like the Trailblazer does in the way her stat scale and the sort of bonuses she provides, then any of the speed sets and Hero of Triumphant Song all work for her. I, if anything, have a super speed variant of the Remembrance Trailblazer using Hero of Triumphant Song because I was able to get enough speed where there's no reason for me to not scale into that to get the extra crit damage bonus. Because why not? Literally, the buffs that they provide scale off crit damage. But that really depends on her stats. There's no guarantee that any of the existing sets will work for Serene either. Or if they have another potential 5-star in the works that we have no idea who the hell they are. Because at this point, once we have obviously Darnhung and March / evernight and terravox accounted for, there's no other flame chaser / Chrysosaur within the prophecy that becomes a demigod that we haven't actually got access to in the game now. So Serene, of course, holds value to the main story, so it's very likely she will be playable. But unless they go for like a previous Chrysosaur or something, a character that we're not exactly sure about, who else could they make playable? I have no idea unless it's a filler character. As for Planar ornaments, I can definitely see one that could definitely be used by March, and potentially by Serene, which is Arcadia of Woven Dreams. It scales up in damage based on how many more than 4 you have of team members, or how many less than 4 you have of team members. If you have 4 additional allies, or if you have only 1 member of your party available, you get a stack up of 36% in damage. There is no reason why a mono remembrance or specifically a remembrance DPS who wants as many remembrance units as possible in their team wouldn't use Arcadia Woven Dreams. Meanwhile, Darnhung, because he is going to be a sustain, there is a lot of good sustain sets, even if they don't specify his stat. If he does scale on HP, and if he does have a memo sprite if he is remembrance, then Bone Collector would work for him. The generic sets that we typically use for supports, Broken Keel, Fleet of the Ageless, Lushaka, The Sunken Seas, Penacony Land of Dreams, Sprightly Vonwak, all of those would definitely work for Darnhung if he is a sustain of sorts. Depending on his personal stats and his team composition and what his team members care for would depend on which one would be best. The situation where I think that Penacony would maybe be his best option would be if he is either ice or physical, or imaginary. So either ice or imaginary in the case of March, and then physical in the case of Fanon. Because if he is made as a support for any of those characters, yeah, that set's gonna go kind of crazy because of the way that it increases the damage by 10% of all of our allies. That'd include, of course, your main DPS who is already scaling up based on their own planar ornaments and relics, then getting a 10% extra bonus. You can't go wrong with it if it works. And energy regeneration, as long as he functions on energy or needs energy, that would work for him. Then I think the next best option is probably going to be Lushaka, the Sunken Seas, because of energy regeneration rate, and then just buffing generic attack of the first character in the lineup, which works better if the character doesn't share his element type. Then after that, it really depends on the personal stats of the characters you're aiming to help. Since Broken Keel has the benefit of increasing crit damage of your allies, which is beneficial to most main DPSs, excluding very specific ones like Break DPSs and DOT DPSs. They don't care about crit, but everyone else does, really. Fleet of the Ageless increases the wearer's max HP by 12%, which I think is actually going to be insane if this is how his stat works. If he focuses on HP, Fleet of the Ageless is a definite option. But when the wearer's speed reaches a certain threshold, it increases all allies' attack by 8%. If March, for example, doesn't function on attack, Fleet of the Ageless is actually not going to be very good for her if he is supporting her. But if Terravox functions with Feign, for example, that buff really works. Then Sprightly Von Wax just been useful since the beginning of the game. It advances forward the action of the character you're playing as by 40% once you enter the battle. I've never been a massive fan of this set because if you have high enough speed, you don't really need your action advancing. The main benefit is the energy regeneration, and there's better sets for that now. I'm sure there are some exclusive circumstances where it could be helpful, but I haven't found any where I've thought it was really necessary to use over the other two. Unless the character's slow, but in most cases you can build characters on speed, that set becomes very useless. So I don't think they need to address a Planar ornament set for either of them, or for even Serene, because there's really good supportive sets that already exist. And the DPS set for March, if she is a DPS, Arcadia Woven Dreams is the best thing for a Mono Remembrance comp, and that's like the most significant choice that I could imagine them using. Let me know what you think, but I'm imagining 3.6 is going to be either March and terravox, well, evernight and terravox, or it's going to be just one character and then the final version will have Serene with the other. I'm hoping March will show up in 3.6 though, and I do think that based on what her boons suggest, she is going to need a unique set, and so is Danham. But yeah, I'm just making this in anticipation, because within the next few days we will see drip marketing, and then it'll confirm or make me look very silly for being wrong, I guess. Doesn't hurt to do this now. It's just food for thought, really. Take care, guys. Hopefully you had fun with this, and let me know what you're looking forward to or who you hope is going to be in 3.6.